Hi, and welcome back to Scotty's Tech.info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus. Recently there was a video that was released by, I think it was like the Tucker Carlson Tonight show on Fox, and they did a little investigation, and I'll link to the video in the description, but in summary, they took two smartphones, and both smartphones had the SIM cards removed, and one of the smartphones was in airplane mode and the other was not. But neither of them were, Wi-Fi was off, Bluetooth was off, no SIM cards, so no cellular connection, one in airplane mode, one in not. And they took these around the Washington, D.C. area for like an hour or something. And the reporter went and took like Uber or something, whatever, I don't know, drove around. And then when they got back to their studio, they had this really cool suitcase. It was like a Wi-Fi man-in-the-middle suitcase. So they then powered, or rather connected both of the smartphones via Wi-Fi to the fancy suitcase, and that fancy suitcase was actually recording the data. It was recording and decrypting the data that was being sent from the phones through the suitcase to Google. And the whole point was to see, okay, if you have no SIM card, and even if your phone is in airplane mode, what data is it reporting back to Google, right? And of course, as they mentioned in the report, we all know that when you have, say, like a Google or an Apple or Windows or whatever kind of smartphone you have, when you, like for example, when you install or upgrade Android, or when you get a new phone, the first thing you do, like say if it's an Android phone, is you type in your Google username and password. And then you have to click a button that says, I agree to all your terms of service. And if you read those terms of service, essentially what it's saying is, I'm agreeing to let you collect data on me, because it's what they call surveillance capitalism, where basically you are using all your services for free, like Gmail and your smartphone and blah, blah, blah. And in return, they're collecting gobs of data about you to give you lots of ads to view and click on in the hopes that you will buy stuff. And this is how Google makes a lot of its money. And of course, we all know that these things are happening. You know that your browsing history and, tracking cookies and browser fingerprints, which I wrote an article about, blah, 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 right? I mean, we all know this is happening. But I was a little bit shocked, actually, maybe more like horrified, because it turns out that when they connected the phone that was not in airplane mode, it transmitted 300 kilobytes of data back to Google servers. And this data included things like second-by-second metadata, but it was actually things like the current barometric pressure. It was basically a prediction with a percentage of on foot, or it would say like in vehicle, or got out of car. That's not what they called it, but it was basically, it was saying, exited vehicle probability 100%. And this was all, there was a whole list of all this data that it was gathering. So, and of course this kind of makes sense, because we know that smartphones have all these little sensors. They have like gyroscopes in them, they have accelerometers in it. So if you start with your cell phone before you take the SIM card out, and of course it has recorded its location, you power off the phone, you take the SIM card out, you turn it back on again, even if it's not connected to anything. Basically, like if you've got your smartphone and it can record its orientation and its acceleration, then if you have a starting point or an ending point or both, you can calculate the route that the person took, right? And it's like, yeah, I guess, we kind of knew this was happening, but I was a little bit shocked that even when a phone is not connected to any network, and even when it's in airplane mode, it's still gathering all this data, and it's using processing power, it's using battery life, it's using basically everything that's in the phone to track you down to like the meter, and to record and relay literally everything you do and everywhere you go. And the extra interesting part about the report was that in terms of, they had the two phones, like I said, and one was in airplane mode and one was not. The one that was in airplane mode actually recorded more data and sent more data back to Google than the one that was not in airplane mode. Which is like, And I suppose you could say, well, this kind of makes sense because there's a misconception about airplane mode. I did a couple videos on how to make a Faraday box to keep your smartphone in to prevent it from connecting. And I'll link to that down in the description too. And a lot of people said, well, just put it in airplane mode. And I think, like, yeah, some people, I think, don't understand that airplane mode, all it means is that the phone is not allowed to transmit. But even that is iffy because, yeah, it gets a little complicated because these guys had two phones, and the one that was in airplane mode was recording more data, right? Well, if a phone is in airplane mode, that doesn't mean it can't receive signals from GPS, because smartphones usually have what's called a GPS or assisted GPS. So a normal GPS receiver, it never actually transmits. It only receives signals from the satellites up above, and based on the multiple signals it receives, it calculates its position. It also receives actual, like, satellite position data first, then it receives kind of like positioning signals, like, on an ongoing basis, and from this it calculates your position on the surface of the Earth, right? AGPS, the assisted part, that's this AGPS that's used in smartphones, it actually uses, I think it's either Wi-Fi or usually the cellular network to receive satellite data that the satellites would normally transmit. The AGPS can actually receive it through the cellular network, so it locks on quicker. But even if that's missing, if a phone is in airplane mode, technically it could just activate the integrated GPS receiver, and it could still track your location and record it and then send it off to Google. So airplane mode is not necessarily foolproof. And furthermore, I think it was a couple of years ago, there's a setting usually, at least in Android, for enhanced location. And there was this big hullabaloo because basically what somebody discovered was that enhanced location is basically the same thing as a GPS. It's like, it's recording your location, but every time it uses the GPS receiver, it's going to drain your battery faster. So the idea was that this assisted location or enhanced location, whatever they call it, it would actually use, again, signals from, I think it was like local open Wi-Fi hotspots, and it would somehow grab some data so it would help track your location without having to fire up the actual integrated GPS. And the hullabaloo came from the fact that when you turn this option off, apparently the phone was still every now and then connecting to open Wi-Fi networks and getting the data anyway, even though you said, don't do this, turn it off. So this is kind of like a known thing where, yeah, you tell it do this and it doesn't really do that, and they kind of fudge a little bit. Yeah, so I mean, like I say, like, we all knew that Google was doing this, and of course they're tracking, and that's why Google services are free and stuff. And but I was a little bit horrified because it's like, well, do you really need to know every little place I go? And furthermore, you're sitting there using my phone, you're using my battery life, you're using all the processing power, you're using the sensors to gather data even when I'm not connected, so that later you can upload it all, so that, like, what, you know? I mean, okay, so sure, it's just for advertising. Right. But, okay, let's say it is just for advertising. It's still a little bit over the top, right? You don't need to know that I went to the grocery store to buy a gallon of milk or something. It's just, is that really going to help you give me better ads? I mean, so, yeah, that was kind of surprising. And what I did actually is I bought a dumb phone because I pretty much decided I'd had enough. Now, I have to say that I am not your typical smartphone user. I have a smartphone, usually a Nexus phone, because I like to get the latest version of Android, and mostly because I'm a nerd. But in terms of using my smartphone, I'm not one of those people that, like, carries it around with me and has my nose buried in the touchscreen all the time. If I basically go out, I take my phone with me, I turn it on, and I even rarely use many of these smart features. I'm not, like, addicted to WhatsApp and all this other nonsense, like. So, but of course, that's my smartphone, and it's my camera, and it also happens to be used for my tie mic, and, you know, it's very handy for certain things. But So, you know, like I'm one of those people I'd be like sitting on the train and I might take my phone out and I go tappy, 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 yeah, okay, whatever, and then put it away. And I'm actually sitting there looking around and like everyone on the train is like, their nose is buried in their phone and it's like, does no one actually talk to each other anymore? Is it like, you know, I mean, there's also this kind of like addiction factor that's a little bit crazy, which of course works very well in Google's favor. And yeah, I would be, you know, I'm usually like sitting on a train, you know, next to some attractive woman or something, and she's got her phone out and everything, and I'm sitting there going like, I sure would like to talk to her, but I wish she'd put her damn phone down. And she's probably sitting there going like this, thumbs all a blur, you know, like, oh my God, I'm sitting next to this guy and he's so cute, but I sure wish he'd pick up his phone and fire up like Facebook Messenger so that I could talk to him. And, you know, it's all just... Anyway, so what I did is I bought a dumb phone. And this is actually a Caterpillar B30, and it's got a camera and a mic and everything, but it doesn't have... it's 3G. It was about $70, so it was cheap, and it's a cell phone. And the only thing it has is Bluetooth hands-free. It does not have Wi-Fi. It does not have GPS. It does not have anything. It's basically just a simple little phone, and you can use it as a phone. And yeah, $70, and it's pretty cool. Because it also happens to be dust-proof. It's waterproof down to 1 meter for up to 30 minutes. You can drop it from a height of 1.8 meters, which is good because I'm 1.89 meters tall. So, and it won't break. And it's kind of like indestructible. And it's also much smaller and much lighter than my smartphone, so it doesn't take up all the space in my pocket. And so there you go. I've pretty much had it with smartphones, and I've decided that dumb phone it is. I will note that, you know, because some people are going to say, yeah, but they can still track you via the cell phone network. Yes, that's true, they can. The thing is that tracking via the cell phone network requires, like, triangulation and blah, 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 right? So that's a little bit more complicated. If it doesn't have Wi-Fi and it doesn't have, you know, yada, 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 it's going to be harder to track, and especially if it's not running, say, Android, where basically Android is an operating system on the smartphone that's literally designed to track and record and transmit everything you do. Whereas this runs on a proprietary operating system, and because it's a very simple phone, that's far, far less likely to happen. So basically, instead of making it super easy to be tracked, I'm making it a little bit more difficult. But it's also just kind of like, yeah, I've kind of had enough, you know, and I don't really need the smartphone anyway, and yeah, so that's what I did. Dumb phone. For more techie tips, see scottystech.info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.